Hello and welcome. My name is Meepolis, they, he, she, and today's pick is We Live Here, Detroit Eviction Defense and the Battle for Housing Justice by Jeffrey Wilson and Bambi Kramer, published by 7 Stories Press in 2024. If you're new here, I picked this particular volume up as soon as I saw it because I believe in grassroots organizing and autonomous action, so I try to highlight books that do a good or interesting job of depicting such things. I particularly appreciated the show don't tell angle that the creative team took, sprinkled with the kinds of details you might not know. I didn't know many of them, if you are not closely connected to someone undergoing foreclosure in the so-called United States, particularly because what happens in Detroit informs a lot of policy that happens elsewhere in the country. Content notes for fiddly eye stuff and guns. Keywords include fixed income, predatory mortgages, disability, white flight, redlining, community defense, discrimination, and economics. The publisher's summary is, quote, a graphic novel featuring uplifting stories of combating and beating calls for their eviction in Detroit, showing how everyday people are fighting to stay in their homes, organizing with their communities, and winning. We Live Here is a graphic novel biography of the members of the local activist group Detroit Eviction Defense combating and beating calls for their eviction. By illustrating the stories of families struggling against eviction, the book gives a voice to those who have remained in Detroit, showing the larger complexities at work in a beleaguered city. These are everyday people fighting back, organizing with others, going into the streets, and winning their homes back. What will Detroit look like in the future? Today, cheap property entices real estate speculators from around the world. Artists arrive from all over, viewing the city as a creative playground. Billionaires are resculpting downtown as a spot for tourism. But beyond the conventional players in urban growth and development, Detroit Eviction Defense, DED, members, like others engaged in place-based struggle all over the country, are pushing back, saying in effect, we live here, we've been here, there is no Detroit without us, end quote. According to the publisher's profile, Jeffrey Wilson is, quote, a graphic novel author and PhD candidate in geography at the University of Arizona. His work focuses on the social determinants of health, specifically the effects of foreclosures on health in Detroit, Michigan. He received a master's in anthropology from Columbia University, where his work explored the ways ethnography could be written in graphic novel form. He has published one of the first graphic novel interviews to appear in a peer-reviewed journal. He lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. End quote. Bambi Kramer works out of Rome, Italy, and she has been exhibited internationally. I would recommend checking out her online portfolio, as there is even more interesting black and white artwork to be seen. Looking at the writing and artwork in more depth, TLDR, I liked it. The page layouts are very square, but there is variety within the rigid grid. The artwork leans a bit minimalistic and is very focused on the human element, with a dash of scene-setting panels. And while I do think the topic does run at least some risk of coming off a bit dry, I was extremely engrossed in the story of it all. Each entry is relatively short and highlights a different situation and response, showing how fairly average people end up fighting so hard to keep a roof over their heads, and the other fairly average people who come out to help them defend their homes. How the legal system fails, more creative problem solving, and a call to not be, quote, reasonable. As Wilson writes, quote, in that sense, the material circumstances will force someone who hasn't read Marx or whatever to do these sorts of things that academics won't do, end quote. To highlight some of the different stories, we see the fallout of redlining, anti-black racism, black capital, and the barriers faced by Spanish-speaking families. We see people who get mortgages and then become disabled, or get pushed out at work and suddenly can't make payments, and others who need loans to fix up their homes. Jerome is promised a wheelchair and an accessible house, and to say they underdelivered is an understatement. The government even stops making payments on his mortgage after the financial crisis, and he ends up spending the rest of his life fighting to keep a roof over his own head. We learn that apparently food stamps counts as income towards a mortgage when it isn't counted as income in any other instance, and how many scammers are preying on people desperate to not lose their housing. Reviewing my notes, because I'm still playing catch up, it does not appear as if there is much sexual diversity highlighted, which is largely just an observation rather than a judgment. Wrapping things up, I was very impressed by the way we were shown, not told, and how many facets and intersections of working class people were explored. 5 stars, because I thought I learned a lot on a couple of different levels. Bye y'all, keep reading, and remember all colonial settler states are a lie. And Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, an Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.